The gospel narrative that we hear today is one of those Bible stories that we hear most often, and often like to tell. The story of Jesus walking on water, a narrative that we hear in the Gospels of Mark and in Matthew and in John. But it is only in Matthew's account that we hear about Peter stepping out from the boat and walking on the water towards Jesus. Until, of course, he falls. This story is one we often hear used as a lesson of Christian discipleship and of faithfulness and of focus. But what this story also teaches us is about fear. How fear can disrupt our senses and cause us to doubt what we see, what we believe, what we know to be true. But most of all, what this story also offers us is hope. As we heard, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go to the other side of the sea while he goes up to the mountain by himself to pray. And by the evening, Jesus was still on the mountain, while the boat, meanwhile, was far from land. And everything that happens next is a great reminder that God has a sense of humor. Unable to reach them in the sea, Jesus takes the most direct and practical route to the boat. He walks on the water. Predictably, however, this was shocking, even frightening to the disciples, so much so that they exclaimed, "It is a ghost," and cried out in fear. Then Jesus quickly identifies himself and says, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." As we hear, Peter isn't convinced, maybe because he, along with all of the disciples, just couldn't believe that this man was Jesus, couldn't believe that this man was actually walking on water, couldn't believe that what they saw was real and not some kind of trick. So Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Come on out." And Peter actually gets out of the boat. And then he actually walks on water until, of course, he notices the strong wind and he becomes frightened. And as he began to sink, what began as a taunt became a cry for help. "Lord, save me," Peter says. And of course, Jesus immediately reaches out his hand and saves him. And then he follows with these seemingly harsh words, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Often when we hear those words, we imagine that Jesus is saying to Peter, "If only you didn't doubt, if only you had greater faith, you could have kept walking on the water." Perhaps. But read a little closer, and you see that Jesus never even told Peter to walk on the water at all. It was not Jesus, but Peter who insisted, who challenged, who even maybe taunted Jesus to command him to come out to the water. And isn't it amazing that Peter was actually able to walk on the water at all? Even to just stand on the water like Jesus, let alone take a step. And despite taking those steps, something that no one else other than Jesus has been able to do, is Jesus now really calling out Peter for not doing more? Imagine for a moment seeing a child take their first steps, a miracle, only to chastise them for falling down. But what if Jesus wasn't calling out Peter for getting distracted, for being afraid, and for falling in the water? What if Jesus was instead calling out Peter for what had happened just before, for letting his fear consume him to the point that he doubted that Jesus was really Jesus at all? On the one hand, this story tells us about how fear disrupts our perception, how it can lead to anxiety and to anger and to doubt, how it can turn us away and even keep us from seeing God right in front of our eyes. And the same remains true for you and for me. When we are afraid, we can become anxious, even angry. We can become so wrapped up in fear or anger that our perception is altered. And this fear can keep us from seeing clearly even when God is right in front of us. And this fear can distract us and even sink us mid-step. But that's not all that this story teaches us. More than anything, this is a story of grace and hope. Because even when Peter falls and cries for help, Jesus pulls him back up. And when Jesus reaches the boat, the wind ceases, and with it, the disciples fear. And they see Jesus for who he truly is. That makes this a story that encapsulates really the whole of our relationship with God. How despite our constant fear and rejection of God, God remains faithful to us and is there to pull us up when we fall. Not if, but when. And that is why this is not only a story about how we, like Peter, shouldn't let fear consume us, shouldn't let it cause us to cast doubt about what we see and know to be true, but it's a story about when, not if, we are afraid, and when, not if, we dare to step out of the boat into danger and fall, and even when, not if, we reject and even challenge Jesus. We need only say, "Lord, save me." And Jesus will be there to calm the elements, to allay our fears, to pull us back up, and to save us. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in to listen to sermons from St. James Parish. Please like and subscribe for more great content and reflections from our community.